This is a true story based on the life of Mrs. Hazel Montgomery. Between cherry orchards and verdant pastures lies a tale worthy of the greatest novelists. Prepare yourself for a narrative that will stir your emotions, where right and wrong will confuse you. This is a space where grandparents share their true stories. So many autumns have passed since the day I was born on this land. Now, as the twilight of my life slowly descends, I feel the need to tell my story, not to seek pity or sympathy, but simply because every life holds its own lessons, its own wounds, and perhaps, somewhere in my story, you may find a piece that fits into your own. My dear, I'm so glad you came to listen to me. You know, at my 75 years, I have so many stories to tell that sometimes it feels like they might overflow. In the 1940s, I was just a young girl, but I was already living quite a life. I had such a wonderful childhood, the kind you don't see anymore these days.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
I grew up on a farm, and mind you, it wasn't just any small farm. It was a stately place with cherry orchards stretching as far as the eye could see, and a herd of Hereford cattle that made the neighbors envious. In those days, we didn't want for anything, but we weren't those fancy rich folks full of heirs either. We were 3 siblings. I was the middle child. Silas Montgomery, my older brother, was such a serious young man, while Daisy, the youngest, was quite the mischievous one. And that house, goodness gracious, never knew silence. Always full of people, constant chatter among cousins, uncles, aunts, and various others who showed up. It was an endless celebration. You see, my child, those lands were a feast for the eyes. Our grandparents were truly blessed. They left that vast expanse of land to our parents and uncles. On our side of Whispering Creek lived my father, Franklin Montgomery, and my mother, Eleanor Montgomery. We lived in a colonial farmhouse, one of those old ones, you know, with porches in front and back, quite the mansion. It even had a basement and attic. On the other side of the creek, now that was quite the merriment. That's where my Uncle Wesley Harrington and Aunt Abigail Harrington, my father's sister, lived. Goodness gracious, they had 8 children, 5 girls and 3 boys. It was a delightful bunch of children. Every blessed day we would gather, whether to go to school or to play, me, my siblings, and all those cousins. It looked like a pilgrimage when we all went out together. The mischief that group would get into. But it was all good fun, just innocent children's play without any malice. We were always running from one side to the other of that creek. There was just a barbed wire fence separating the 2 properties. But for us children, it might as well not have existed. It was all 1 yard to us, a world of land for us to play and get up to our antics. Sundays were special, with lunches alternating between our house and our uncle's. We were more than 25 people around that long table made of hardwood. The aroma of country cooking, prepared by our mothers and aunts, mingled with the animated conversations of adults about harvests, politics, and regional events, while we children ran freely through the orchards. Our daily routine began with the sunrise. Breakfast served in the kitchen. We could already hear the horses' hoofbeats arriving. They were the cousins coming for our journey to school. There were about 12 of us in total, looking like a small entourage when we traveled together. The older ones always in front, looking after the younger ones, on a 1-hour journey to the rural school. In Mrs. Cordelia Fleming's multi-grade school, we all learned together, different ages and grades in the same space. It was beautiful to see how we helped each other, the older ones always assisting the little ones with their lessons. I excelled in reading, while other cousins shone in mathematics. The afternoons after school were filled with adventures. In the heat, Whispering Creek became our private swimming pool. We girls swam in old dresses, while the boys showed off by jumping from the highest rocks. We had fishing competitions with sieves, always with the older ones, purposely letting the little ones win. Our house had an immense orchard with all kinds of fruit. It was common to find all the children perched in the trees, pockets full of cherries, plums, and blackberries. Aunt Helena always said we were like a flock of parakeets. Such was the noise we made among the branches. Each of us had our responsibilities. I helped with the Plymouth Rock chickens and the vegetable garden, always accompanied by my cousins. The boys accompanied their fathers in tending to the Hereford cattle or working in the cherry orchard. Even during work, we found ways to have fun. We sang, told stories, invented games. The full moon nights transformed the yard between the two houses into our personal playground. We played hide and seek, tag, and listened to grandfather's ghost stories. The older cousins loved making strange sounds to scare the younger ones, causing a general commotion and many laughs. Our family maintained certain traditions. We had piano recitals twice a week with Miss Imogen Whitaker, who came especially to teach the girls. The lessons took place in the music room where grandmother's grand piano was kept. The boys had quarter horse training lessons and learned about farm management from our fathers. During the cherry harvest, everyone helped, even the smaller children. It was work that united the family even more. We sang old songs learned from our parents while the baskets filled with red cherries under the hot sun. It was a blessed childhood. Everything was very simple and pure, as childhood should be. Well, my child, time passed, and in the blink of an eye, things began to change. You know when your body starts to change and your head spins too? That's how it was for me around my 13 years when I started becoming a young lady. Goodness gracious, what confusion. Suddenly my mother, Eleanor Montgomery, became more flustered than a chicken when a plane flies overhead. All the time it was, "Girl, where are you going? Who are you talking to? Hazel Montgomery, it's getting dark. Come inside." I would get so annoyed, but today I understand it was just a mother's concern. And look how funny. It was during this time that I started noticing my cousin Caleb Harrington more. Goodness, it still gives me a warm feeling to remember. He was already 16, a young man, while I was still awkward, just beginning to understand the ways of life. Caleb was already helping Uncle Wesley with the cattle, looking so handsome. The Summer County Fair was quite an event. We always had a big celebration at the farm, inviting everyone from the region. There were campfires, mulled cider for the adults, maple candy, and lots of music. It was during these times that I felt strange things, you know, when it seems like there's a flock of butterflies dancing in your stomach. That's how I felt when I saw Caleb doing the barn dance. I would stand there, all dressed up in my calico dress that my mother had made, pretending not to care, but my eyes, oh, those traitors, were always looking for Caleb in the crowd. And when our eyes met, mercy, it was as if the world stopped for a second. Of course, I would quickly lower my gaze, all awkward. Caleb didn't help either, you know. Sometimes I would catch him looking at me differently. It wasn't that teasing cousin look anymore. It was something else. I remember well one time at one of these festivals. Everyone was dancing, the music playing loudly, and suddenly Caleb appeared by my side. "Would you like to dance, Hazel Montgomery?" he asked. I nearly dropped dead right there. I turned redder than a ripe tomato, but accepted. Dancing hand in hand with him was like walking on clouds, but don't think it was all joy. There were times when I felt all confused. After all, he was my cousin. We had grown up together, played together. How could I now be feeling all these things? It was such confusion in my head. And to make matters worse, it seemed everyone began to notice. The aunts whispered in corners. The other cousins would giggle when we were near. It was all, "Look at the lovebirds," which embarrassed me terribly. My mother became more attentive than ever. If she was keeping an eye on me before, now she seemed to have eyes in the back of her head. Every time Caleb and I were alone, for more than 5 minutes, there she came, inventing something to call me. "Hazel Montgomery, come help me with this, daughter. I need you here." It was so frustrating. It was a time of many discoveries. We grow up and the world becomes different. Children's games give way to other interests, other feelings. It's beautiful, but also frightening, especially when you start to feel these things for someone so close to the family. Oh my, what good times that won't return. Oh my child, just remembering this makes my heart race. What I'm going to tell you now wasn't pleasant. Well, when I began to notice that Caleb was also looking at me differently, it seemed like a fire was lit inside me. I started doing everything to be alone with him. It was one scheme after another. You should have seen it. Sometimes I pretended I needed help, getting fruit from the higher branches. Other times, I made up reasons to fetch water from the well, just when I knew he would be around. There were times I even pretended to be afraid of something, just so he would come to protect me. I pulled such stunts that today I'm even embarrassed to remember. Then one day, Ave Maria, I'll never forget, we were in the orchard pretending to pick cherries. Suddenly, Caleb came very close indeed. I thought I would faint right there. My heart was beating so hard I thought he could hear it, and in a quick movement, he gave me a kiss. A kiss, child. My legs went weak. I felt like I would melt right there. After that day, it was as if the floodgates had opened. We started meeting in secret, whenever possible, behind the weathered barn, in the middle of the cherry orchard, near Whispering Creek. Any little corner served for us to exchange kisses and embraces. We were young, full of fire and love, not thinking much about the consequences. We thought we were fooling everyone, but today I see that probably half the farm already suspected our wanderings. But then, my dear, came the day when everything went wrong. Mercy, just remembering gives me chills. It was a Saturday afternoon. I remember as if it were today. The sun was beginning to set, giving that beautiful orange tone to the sky. We were there, kissing as always, hidden behind some trees near the house. We were so engrossed that we didn't hear the footsteps approaching. When I realized it, I heard a shout that almost made me jump out of my skin. "Hazel Montgomery! Caleb! What shamelessness is this?" It was my father. Blessed Virgin, I had never seen the man so furious in my life. His eyes looked like they would pop out. They were so wide open, his face as red as a hot pepper. In one movement, he tore a branch from a tree and stripped all the leaves with one swipe. He looked like the devil incarnate and began to beat us without mercy. I screamed, cried, begged, "Father, for the love of God, I'll never do this again. Forgive me." But he didn't listen, just repeated between one blow and another, "He's like your brother. This is wrong. Have you no shame?" Poor Caleb tried to protect me, but he also took quite a beating. We came out of there beaten, not only in body, but also in soul. It was the first time my father had beaten me. It hurt, and how it hurt. But what hurt more was seeing the disappointment in his eyes. That night, I cried until I couldn't anymore. I curled up in my bed, feeling my back burning, but the pain in my chest was much worse. My mother came into the room once, looked at me with a mixture of pity and disapproval, but said nothing. I think even she didn't know what to say. After that day, we spent some time not even able to look at each other. It was a mixture of shame, fear, and a feeling of guilt that weighed more than lead. At meals, I would keep my head down, barely touching the food. Caleb no longer appeared at our house. I heard that Uncle Wesley had also given him a beating when he found out. But you know what's craziest, my child? Even with all the beating and scolding, deep down, we still felt that warmth for each other. It was as if they had tried to put out a fire with a small cup of water. It hurt, it was frightening, but love remained there, stubborn as ever. I spent days tormented, wondering if what we felt was really so wrong. After all, we weren't real siblings, just cousins. But then I remembered my father's words, the look of disappointment on my mother's face, and all that guilt would return. The worst was at the farm festivals, when we couldn't avoid meeting. The looks we exchanged were a mixture of longing, desire, and sadness. There were times I thought I would explode from so much pent-up feeling, but the worst was yet to come. It wasn't long before the gossip started. You know how it is in a small town, right? People's tongues are sharper than razors. Soon, rumors spread that I was ruined, that I was no longer fit to marry. It was each embarrassing whisper, each sideways glance in church. Ave Maria, it made me want to disappear. Ah, my child, love is a complicated thing, you know, especially when it's forbidden. We find ourselves in this bind, not knowing whether to follow the heart or the head, whether to obey our elders or risk everything for a feeling. Some time passed, and one fine day, my father came home with a face as closed as rainy weather. He immediately dropped the bomb. I was going to get married. Just like that, without further ado, as if he were negotiating a cow at the fair. He didn't even bother to ask me anything. Everything was already arranged down to the smallest detail. Of course, I didn't want to hear about it. My heart still beat strongly for Caleb, even though he was far away. But in those days, we had no choice. It was the Father's will that ruled. On the day my suitor was to visit me, my mother, Eleanor Montgomery, finally gathered the courage to talk to me. Poor thing, she had a funeral face. She sat beside me on the bed and began to speak softly, as if the walls had ears. Hazel Montgomery, she said, I know you like Caleb, but you need to understand something. Marrying a cousin is not good. Then she told me she knew many people who had married cousins, but in our family, it was more forbidden than dancing during Lent. She said my father, Franklin Montgomery, would never accept it. And she didn't stop there. She told me about Mrs. Alvina, her childhood friend, who had married her cousin. They had 7 children, but 2 were born with serious problems. One came with a disease called cystic fibrosis. The child lived in terrible suffering, always having problems breathing and gaining weight. The other was born with a rare genetic condition that affected the bones and left the child all twisted. Poor thing, my mother said that Dr. Geraldo, the family doctor, had explained to Mrs. Alvina that this happened because when cousins marry, the chances of having children with problems increase. It's because we have similar genes, you understand? Then these bad genes are more likely to join and cause these complications. The worst part is that my father knew Mrs. Alvina. He had seen up close the suffering of that family. That's why he was so afraid of me being with Caleb. They even thought it was God's punishment for those who disobeyed. I was frightened by all this, I won't lie. I didn't know anything about these disease things. But you know how it is. You can't control the heart. Even with fear, I still felt that love for Caleb burning inside me. Well, the day of the suitor's visit arrived. My goodness, what an event. It seemed like the President of the Republic was going to pass by our house. They arranged everything in the farmhouse, even removing the covers from the living room furniture that only appeared on Sunday Mass days. And wouldn't you know, the young man arrived in a fancy car, one of those imported ones that we only saw in soap operas. His parents all dressed up, the mother with a pearl necklace that must have been worth more than our farm, the father with a gold watch on his wrist that shone brighter than the midday sun. The young man must have been about 20, but he thought he was the last okra in the garden. He was handsome, I can't deny, tall, well-groomed, fragrant, but he had an air of conceit that irritated me. He introduced himself as Garrett Blackwood, son of Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood. We all sat in the living room in a conversation more forced than a smile in an ID photo. My parents all smiling, entertaining, me quiet in a corner, feeling more out of place than a cow on top of a tree. Then the young man's mother, all full of herself, began to ask strange questions. She said they had heard some comments in town, that they had some doubts. She looked at me as if I were a rotten fruit among the good ones. I couldn't stand it. I don't know what came over me. It seems all the anger, all the frustration I had been holding back exploded at once. I jumped up, stamped my foot on the ground so hard that I think even the cows in the pasture heard it. "Stay away from me," I shouted. "I don't want to know about any marriage." I left the room like a hurricane, leaving everyone with their mouths open. I went to my room, slamming the door so hard that I think there's still a mark on the wall today. I took those horrible high heels that my mother had forced me to wear and threw them away. It seemed like I was throwing away all those rules, all those obligations they wanted to force down my throat. I barely had time to breathe, and my father was already there, red, snorting like an angry bull. I thought I was going to get another beating, but at that moment I was blind with rage. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "You can beat me as much as you want. I will not marry that conceited fool, even if you kill me." My father stood there, looking at me as if he had seen a ghost. I don't think he had ever seen me like that, confronting him. For a moment, I thought he was really going to hit me, but then he just shook his head and left the room, more wilted than a flower without water. I stayed there trembling, waiting for what would happen. I heard some raised voices downstairs, some doors slamming, then a silence that seemed to swallow the whole house. That night, no one came to talk to me. I stayed in the room crying, afraid of what would happen. My mother didn't even call me for dinner as she always did. But the truth is, I was feeling relieved for having said what was stuck inside. The next day, my mother came into the room with a pitiful face. She said that Garrett Blackwood and his family had left offended, that my father was furious, that I had embarrassed the whole family, that a match like that was what any girl in town would want. But you know what's strangest? Deep in her eyes, I saw a little sparkle of pride, as if she was happy that I had had the courage she never had. The following weeks were hell. My father barely looked at me. My mother walked on eggshells. The rest of the family found out. And there were so many sideways glances, so many malicious comments. Even the neighborhood began to whisper. It was all, "This girl is ruined. Who would have thought? The daughter of Franklin Montgomery." Horrible. But I didn't regret it. For the first time in my life, I had taken the reins of my destiny. I didn't know what would happen from then on, but one thing I was sure of. No one was going to force me to marry someone I didn't want. My child, now I'm going to tell you the most difficult part of my life. It's as if everything that happened before was just the beginning of a terrible nightmare. It still hurts to remember, but I think it's important to share so that you understand how cruel life can be sometimes. After all that confusion with the arranged marriage, I was devastated. I spent days crying in corners, avoiding everyone, unable to bear staying at home with that heavy atmosphere. I went to Whispering Creek. It was my favorite place, where I would go to think, to try to understand everything that was happening. Not to mention, I thought that at any moment, Caleb would appear. I sat on a large rock, watching the water flow. I was so distracted, so lost in my thoughts, that I didn't notice someone approaching. Suddenly, I felt a strong hand covering my mouth and a cloth with a strong smell on my nose. I tried to scream, to struggle, but it was useless. In seconds, everything went dark. When I woke up, my head hurt so much it felt like it would explode. I opened my eyes slowly, trying to understand where I was. The smell of mold and rotten wood invaded my nostrils. Gradually, I recognized the place. It was the old, abandoned, weathered barn, the one that was at the back of the property. No one had been there for years. It was then that panic took hold of me. I tried to move and realized I was tied up. Thick ropes bound my arms and legs to an old chair. My mouth was also gagged. I could only emit muffled sounds. The barn roof had a huge hole, and sunlight came through, illuminating the dust floating in the air. It was in this clarity that I saw a figure moving in the shadows. My heart froze when I recognized who it was. Garrett Blackwood came out of the darkness with a smile that frightened me more than anything I had ever seen in my life. His eyes had a strange, almost sick gleam. He approached slowly, like a predator circling its prey. "So the little bitch is really ruined," he said in a voice that made me tremble from head to toe. I tried to scream, but I could only make muffled sounds because of the gag. Tears began to stream down my face as I struggled, trying to free myself. Garrett Blackwood laughed, a cold sound without joy. "No use trying, dear. No one will hear you here." He began to walk around the chair where I was tied, talking as if he were commenting on the weather. I prepared a little corner here for us to spend more time together, to get to know each other better." He stopped in front of me, crouching to bring his face level with mine. "It was even good that you didn't want to get married. Since you're already ruined, we can have fun without commitment." Garrett Blackwood stepped back a bit, picking up a bottle of bourbon that was in a corner. He took a long swig and continued talking. "Your father should have taught you better, A proper young lady doesn't reject a good match like that. But it's no problem. I'll teach you a few things." He approached again, and the smell of alcohol on his breath made me nauseous. I closed my eyes tightly, wishing it was just a nightmare, that I would wake up at any moment, but it wasn't a dream. It was real, terribly real. I felt his hand touching my face, moving down my neck. I tried to pull away, but the ropes wouldn't allow it. I began to cry desperately, mentally begging for someone, anyone, to appear and save me. "Don't cry," he said in a falsely sweet tone. "It will be fun, you'll see. And maybe after this, you'll learn to value a real man." My heart froze when I saw Garrett Blackwood take a gun from his belt. He placed it very visibly, like a silent warning. "I'm going to untie you now," he said, beginning to untie the ropes. "But don't even think about doing anything stupid. This gun is not a toy. It's loaded." My hands and feet were free, but I never felt so trapped. Fear paralyzed me. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't move. the gun gleaming in the dim light of the barn, was a constant reminder of the danger I was in. Garrett Blackwood dragged me to a corner where there was an old mattress on the floor. I closed my eyes tightly, wishing to disappear as I felt his hands touching me. Tears ran down my face, but I dared not make a sound. What happened next was a nightmare that seemed to last an eternity. Each second was an agony, a violation not only of my body, but of my soul. When it was all over, I lay there motionless, feeling dirty and broken. Garrett Blackwood seemed to notice something, perhaps the blood that revealed my lost virginity. For a moment, I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Remorse, perhaps? He sat down, putting his head in his hands. "What have I done?" he murmured, but it was too late for regrets. At that moment, I realized that something inside me had died. The innocent girl I was no longer existed. In her place remained only a painful emptiness and a feeling of filth that I thought I would never be able to wash away. Garrett Blackwood dressed hastily, avoiding looking at me. Before leaving, he turned and said in a trembling voice, "If you tell anyone, I'll deny everything. No one will believe you." And so he left me alone in that cold, dark barn with nothing but my pain and shame as company. I heard his horse moving away. Only then did I remove the gag. When I finally managed to move, every part of my body hurt. It wasn't just physical pain. I dressed slowly, my hands trembling so much I could barely button my dress. I looked around at the barn, which now seemed even more somber and threatening. I stumbled out of there, wondering how everything could seem so normal when my life had just been destroyed. I walked aimlessly for a while, not knowing where to go or what to do. How could I return home after this? How could I look my parents in the eyes, knowing what had happened? Even so, my feet led me back home. I don't know how I managed, but I returned stealthily, like a wounded animal seeking shelter. My heart was beating so hard I thought someone might hear it. Every shadow, every little noise startled me. What if Garrett Blackwood had returned? What if someone saw me in that state? I managed to reach my room without being noticed, thank God. Everyone seemed to be busy with their own lives, oblivious to the tragedy that had happened to me. I grabbed some clean clothes and went straight to the bathroom. Under the shower, I scrubbed my skin until it was red, as if the water could wash away not only the dirt, but also the memory of those disgusting hands touching me. But it didn't help. The scene of what had happened wouldn't leave my head. It was as if it had been etched in iron and fire in my memory. Cursed Garrett Blackwood, I thought, the tears mixing with the shower water. How did he have the courage to do this? And then it hit me. All this because of people's gossip, those malicious conversations, those rumors. How could a lie cause so much misfortune? I left the shower feeling a little cleaner on the outside, but inside I was dead. I returned to my room and curled up in bed, hugging the pillow as if it were a shield against the world. The days that followed, I didn't want to leave my room anymore. I didn't want to see anyone. My sister, Hazel Montgomery, would come to talk to me. Poor thing, she didn't understand what was happening. "Sweetie, let's go outside. The day is so beautiful," she would say. I would just shake my head, make up some excuse. How to explain to her that the world outside had lost all its beauty for me? Mother also came, worried. She would bring food, try to make me eat. "My daughter, you need to eat," she insisted, but I could barely swallow. Each forkful seemed like sand in my mouth. They thought I was like this because of Caleb, you know. They thought it was longing, or perhaps stubbornness, because of that whole arranged marriage story. Oh, if they only knew. A week passed like this, me wasting away in the room, the family worried outside. I heard conversations in corners, whispers. What's wrong with her? Is she sick? It was on one of these endless nights that I heard a knock on the window. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks, but the knock repeated, louder this time. With my heart in my mouth, I approached the window slowly, and there he was, Caleb. I opened the window with trembling hands. "Caleb," I whispered, looking around to make sure no one had seen him. "I came to see you," he replied, his eyes full of concern. "Sweetie, what's happening? Everyone is worried about you. Aunt Eleanor told my mother that you're not well." I felt the tears returning, blurring my vision. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it would jump out of my mouth. "Caleb," I began, but the words got stuck in my throat. How to tell him? How to explain the inexplicable? I looked into his eyes, those eyes I knew so well, that had always brought me comfort, and suddenly I found myself lying. "It's missing you," I said, my voice trembling a little. "It's been difficult being apart." I don't know if he believed me or not, but at that moment, it seemed like it was what he wanted to hear. Caleb leaned through the window and kissed me. Ah, how I missed that kiss. For a moment, I forgot everything, the horror, the pain, the shame. There was only that kiss, that moment, but reality soon knocked at the door, literally. I heard footsteps approaching my room. "Go, Caleb," I whispered, pushing him gently. "Someone's coming." He disappeared into the darkness just in time. The door opened, and my mother entered. "Just came to say good night, my daughter," she said, approaching the bed. "Why is the window open?" she asked. I said I wanted some fresh air, but she, suspicious, put her body a little out and looked to the sides, saying, "It's better to close it, daughter. You know how mosquitoes are at this time." After a kiss on the forehead, she was gone. The days passed, and gradually I left the room. I returned to doing my chores, helping in the kitchen. Everyone seemed relieved to see me better. Almost 2 months passed like this, me pretending everything was fine, carrying that horrible secret inside me. But gradually, I began to notice some changes in my body, morning sickness, tender breasts. Deep down, I knew what it was, but I didn't want to admit it, even to myself. It was one afternoon, while I was helping my mother make cherry cobbler, that she caught me by surprise. "Daughter," she began, without looking directly at me, stirring the dessert in the pot, "have you been sleeping with Caleb in secret?" I felt as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. The blood froze in my veins. "What?" I managed to stammer. "Why didn't I think of this before?" I felt as if someone had thrown a bucket of cold water on me. So that's why he had accepted to take responsibility so quickly. He thought it was all my plan. At that moment, I realized there was no other way. I needed to tell the truth. I couldn't let Caleb marry me thinking it was all a setup. He didn't deserve that. "Caleb," I began, feeling my throat dry. "It's not like that." He stopped walking and looked at me, confused. "What do you mean, Hazel? What's going on?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather courage. The words seemed too heavy in my mouth. I am pregnant for real, Caleb." I saw his smile fade. He became serious, looking at me as if trying to understand. "But how? We never—" "It's not yours," I said, tears already streaming down my face. "The child is not yours, Caleb." He took a step back as if I had slapped him. "Not mine? Then whose is it? What kind of tasteless joke is this? Do I look like a clown to you?" And that's when everything collapsed. Between sobs, I told Caleb everything: the kidnapping, the barn, Garrett Blackwood. Each word was like tearing off a piece of myself. Caleb's face changed as I spoke. from the initial shock to fury, and then to a deep sadness. When I finished, we stood there in silence, the sound of the creek flowing seeming deafening. "You didn't tell me before?" he asked finally, his voice breaking. "I was ashamed," I confessed. "Afraid. I didn't know what to do." Caleb was quiet for a moment, looking at the horizon. Then he turned to me, his eyes full of determination. "We'll continue with the wedding," he said. I was shocked. "What?" "But Caleb, you heard what I said. The child is not yours." "I heard," he replied, taking my hands in his, "and I don't care. Hazel, I've loved you since we were children. I won't let what that scoundrel did destroy our future." The tears returned with full force. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "But what about the baby?" I asked between sobs. "It will be our child," Caleb said with a certainty that left me speechless. "I'll raise this child as if it were mine, because it will be. No one needs to know the truth except the two of us." I stood there looking at Caleb, hardly believing what was happening. How could he be so good, so noble? I didn't deserve so much love. "And Garrett Blackwood?" I asked, the fear returning. "What if he finds out?" Caleb's eyes darkened. "Leave him to me. That coward will pay for what he did, but not now. Now we need to take care of you and the baby." He pulled me into a hug, and there, in Caleb's arms, I felt for the first time in months that maybe, just maybe, things could be okay. We returned to the house hand in hand. The families were still there, discussing the wedding preparations. When we entered, everyone went quiet, looking at us. I saw the relief on my parents' faces, the joy in my aunt's eyes. They had no idea of the drama that had unfolded outside, of the sacrifice Caleb was making for me. In the days that followed, it was a rush, wedding preparations, secret doctor visits to take care of the pregnancy, trying to keep up appearances. But every night, when I was alone in my room, the guilt would return. Guilt for lying to my family, guilt for accepting Caleb's sacrifice, guilt for what had happened in the barn. It was a huge weight to carry. And there was the fear, too. Fear that Garrett Blackwood would find out. Fear that someone would suspect the truth. Fear of the future. How would it be to raise a child born of that violence? How could I look at this child without remembering that terrible night? But then I would remember Caleb, his strength, his love for me, and I would find courage to move forward. The wedding day arrived faster than I expected. It was a simple ceremony, just with the family, as they had planned. When I entered the small Pine Valley church, I saw Caleb waiting for me at the altar. He smiled at me, that smile I had known since childhood, and I felt a wave of love and gratitude so strong it almost made me fall. We said our vows, exchanged rings, and suddenly I was a married woman. The celebration afterward was joyful, everyone celebrating without having any idea of the secret that Caleb and I carried. That night, already in our new room in the house we had received from our parents, Caleb hugged me tightly. "Everything will be all right, Hazel," he whispered. "We'll overcome this together." On that first night as husband and wife, Caleb was more than I could have hoped for. He was patient, gentle, and understanding. There was no pressure, no demands. He understood my fears without me having to explain. When bad memories threatened to swallow me, Caleb was there, hugging me, making me feel safe. Gradually, I relearned to trust, to not be afraid of being touched. It was a night of discoveries, of healing. For the first time since that terrible day in the barn, I felt that my body was mine again. Caleb showed me that love can be gentle, respectful. In the days that followed, we learned to live together. To tell the truth, we lived in a honeymoon state. The pregnancy progressed, bringing its own joys and fears. There were days when I was happy, imagining what our child would be like. Other days, fear consumed me. What if the child resembled Garrett Blackwood? How would I deal with that? Caleb, always patient, reminded me that the child was innocent, that it would be loved no matter what happened. My child, life has such twists that we can't even imagine. Before the baby was born, something happened that left everyone on edge. One fine day, Garrett Blackwood's parents showed up at our house, desperate. Beatrice Blackwood, Garrett's mother, had eyes red from crying. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood, his father, always so imposing, was sad and worried. They said their son had been missing for 2 days, and they didn't know where else to look. Everyone was a bit awkward, you know. Caleb and I knew what Garrett Blackwood had done to me, but no one else in the family had any idea. So we all stood there, playing dumb and saying that no, we hadn't seen him around there, and it was true. I confess I was worried. Would Caleb? No, he wouldn't do such a foolish thing, would he? His look had been so strange when I told him what had happened. But no, Caleb was there by my side the whole time. Days passed, and still no sign of Garrett Blackwood appearing. My belly kept growing, and with it, my concern. What had happened to the missing Garrett Blackwood? It was then that my father went to town to take care of some business and returned with a hair-raising story. He gathered everyone in the living room and began to tell in that grave voice of his, "You have no idea of the talk going around town," he said, shaking his head. "It seems that Garrett Blackwood has done one of his worst." Everyone was silent, waiting for him to continue. I felt my heart accelerate. What had that scoundrel done this time? "They say around there," my father continued, "that Garrett Blackwood was riding near the Thornberry farm. You know, that family that lives near Riverdale Stream." We nodded. Everyone knew the Thornberrys, good, hard-working people. "Well then," my father proceeded, "it seems that Garrett Blackwood saw Emmeline Thornberry, Silas Thornberry's wife, bathing in the river." I felt a shiver run down my spine. I could already imagine where this story was headed. "The scoundrel," my father said, his voice full of disgust, "attacked Mrs. Thornberry, did a barbarous thing to her." I felt Caleb tense up beside me. I took his hand, trying to calm him. Only the two of us there knew it wasn't the first time Garrett Blackwood had done such a thing. "But the worst part," my father continued, "is that their little son, only 2 years old, was there, saw everything that the scoundrel did to his mother." A collective gasp of horror echoed through the room. Imagining such a scene was already terrible, but in front of a child, it was stomach-turning. "And then what happened?" someone asked. I think it was my aunt. My father took a deep breath before continuing. "Well, it seems that in the middle of this barbarity, Silas Thornberry arrived and caught everything." You could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew that Silas Thornberry was a hot-blooded man. Garrett Blackwood, when he saw Silas, ran away, jumped on his horse. He didn't even bother to put his pants on and rode off. In another situation, the image of Garrett Blackwood riding naked might have been comical, but at that moment, no one felt like laughing. Silas went after him, of course. He mounted his horse and set off in pursuit of Garrett Blackwood. My father paused, as if gathering courage to tell the rest. They say that in the rush, Garrett Blackwood ended up falling off his horse, hit his head on a rock, and, well, didn't get up again. A heavy silence fell over the room. Even after all he had done, it was hard not to feel a tightness in the chest. I personally felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief knowing he could no longer hurt anyone. Guilt for feeling this relief. And then, man, continue, my mother asked, her voice trembling. Then the body was only found a few days later, my father replied, shaking his head. Some travelers passing through the region said that the vultures had already begun to, well, ate his eyes. My father was hesitating to speak, and they ate his private parts. Everyone was shocked. I felt my stomach turn. The image was too strong. But what about Silas? Someone asked. At first he kept quiet, but then Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood started putting pressure on, threatening. Silas ended up confessing everything because they found Garrett Blackwood's pants on the riverbank on his property. They also took the testimony of his wife, the victim. And what will happen to him? Will he be punished for defending his family's honor? My father shrugged. For now, nothing. Colonel Blackwood is furious, of course, but the sheriff is on Silas's side, said it was self-defense. We all sat there digesting the story. It was a lot to process. Garrett Blackwood dead, the Thornberry child traumatized, Mrs. Thornberry going through something so terrible. It was a pity. But deep down, way deep down, I felt a relief. Garrett Blackwood would never appear wanting to know about the baby. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I looked at Caleb and saw in his eyes that he was thinking the same thing. He squeezed my hand lightly, as if to say, "It's over. Everything's all right now." In the days that followed, the news died down like fire in dry straw. Everyone was talking about it, a continuous buzz, each telling a different version of the story. People seemed to only think about how the vultures had eaten his private parts. It was truly shocking. I confess I thought about it for many days. Some people said Garrett Blackwood had been cursed. Others said it was divine punishment. But deep down, everyone knew he had reaped what he had sown. Garrett Blackwood's family was so devastated that they ended up moving away from town. Colonel Thaddeus Blackwood, who always walked around with his nose in the air, now hardly left the house. Beatrice Blackwood, the madam, they say aged 10 years in the blink of an eye. They sold the farm and went to Cincinnati, away from the town's stares and whispers. I felt sorry for them. After all, no parent deserves what happened to them. I kept thinking about how many other girls that rascal Garrett Blackwood had harmed. How many, like me, kept this painful secret in their hearts without the courage to say anything. We live in a world where often the victim ends up carrying the guilt and shame. It's not fair, but that's how things are. And I'm sure if he were alive, he would certainly do it again. Well, but life goes on, doesn't it? And about 10 days after all this confusion, the most beautiful thing in the world happened. My son was born, my Hudson, a strong and beautiful boy. When they put Hudson in my arms for the first time, I felt an emotion that can't even be explained. It was a love so great, so pure, that for a moment I forgot everything else. There was only me and that tiny little being that had just arrived in the world. Caleb was by my side, crying like a child. He took Hudson in his arms with such care that it seemed he was holding a crystal vase. "My son," he kept repeating, his voice breaking, "my son." We baptized him at the Pine Valley Church. It was quite a celebration, the first time in months that I saw everyone truly happy, without that dark cloud hanging over our heads. Reverend Ezekiel Thornton poured the water on his little head, and the little rascal didn't even cry. He stayed there quietly, looking at everything with those curious big eyes. He was my parents' first grandchild. My brother, who had married before me, still hadn't had a child. Laurel, his wife, took a while to get pregnant, but then didn't stop, They had 4 children, one after the other. But at that time, Hudson was the sensation of the family. I remember, as if it were today, the relief on my mother's face when she saw Hudson for the first time. She took him in her arms, examined him from head to toe, and then looked at me with eyes full of tears. "Thank God, my daughter," she said. "He is perfect." At the time, I didn't quite understand, but then I remembered her concern. My parents thought Hudson was Caleb's son, my cousin. They truly believed that marriage between cousins could cause problems in children. They must have been worrying all this time, imagining if the baby would be born with some problem. My child, you can't imagine how it was after Hudson was born. It seems like a faucet of blessings opened in our house. 2 years after him, I started having one after another. In the end, there were 5 children in total. 5. 3 boys and 2 girls. I confess that with each growing belly, there was that anxiety. Will everything be all right? Thank the good Lord, none were born with problems. All healthy, perfect, and beautiful. Oh, what beautiful children, my children. Some were delivered by the midwife right there at home. Mrs. Mabel Winters, an old warrior midwife, brought half of my children into the world. Others were born in the hospital. Each had their story, their own way of arriving. My life always revolved around our home and family. I never worked outside the home, and look, with that bunch of boys to take care of, it seemed like I was always busy, whether wringing clothes in the wash tub, filling hungry stomachs, or tending to scraped knees. Meanwhile, Caleb sweated out there. There were days when he would leave before the sun rose and only return when the stars were already in the sky, taking care of those cherry orchards that stretched as far as the eye could see. From time to time, I would see him out there, mounted on one of our horses, driving the cattle. It wasn't an easy life, but it was our life. Simple, it's true, but full of love and with the smell of fresh coffee and wet earth. Today, with all the children married, the house is so quiet. Sometimes I even miss that noise, that rush. But then the grandchildren come and the house fills with life again. I have 22 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. Not all the children are married. Griffin, my 5th son, is going through some troubles. Poor boy was betrayed by his wife, an ambitious hussy who left him and the children to run away with her boss. Poor son is nursing quite a heartbreak. But calm down. This old lady already has her eye on someone to introduce to him. There's Mrs. Tabitha Prescott's daughter, you know, a good woman, a widow who just returned from the city. She never even had children. Poor thing. I think she would be good for Griffin. He needs someone to take care of him and the children, and she needs a family. Who knows? It might work out. My day-to-day now is calmer. Every morning, I take my 2 youngest grandchildren to school. It's a good walk, but I like it. I stop along the way, chatting with the neighbors. We catch up, exchange recipes, talk about other people's lives. I won't lie, we do talk. When it rains, Griffin takes the children by car, but I prefer sunny days, you know. It's good for the joints and the head too. Looking back at everything that happened, sometimes I can't believe it. It seems like it was another life. Caleb was the best husband a woman could ask for. He raised Hudson as if he were his own. A father is not who makes the child, but who raises them. Isn't that right? As soon as Caleb would arrive home, it would turn into a celebration. The children jumping on him, clinging to his legs, wanting to tell the day's news. And he, with the patience of Job, gave attention to each one. There were difficult moments, of course. Not everything was roses. There were times of bad harvests, of illness in the children, of fights between siblings, but we always found a way to overcome together. Hudson grew up became a good man, married Magnolia, daughter of Jeremiah Finch from the general store. They've already given me 3 grandchildren, some adorable little rascals. Seeing my first son, the one who came from so much pain, creating his own family with so much love, there's no price for that, you know. The others also followed their paths. Piper, my second, became a teacher. Jasper went to the big city, works in a bank. Willa married a farmer and lives on the neighboring property, and so it goes. Looking back on the road I've traveled, I see my life as a symphony of highs and lows, marked by moments of deep sorrow, but also of boundless joy. From an innocent girl on the cherry farm to a woman who endured unimaginable hardship, then became a wife and a mother of 5, every chapter left its own indelible mark on me. Caleb, the man I was lucky enough to call my husband, taught me the true meaning of love and compassion. He didn't just accept Hudson as his own son, he loved him unconditionally. Every time I watched Caleb hold Hudson close, telling him bedtime stories, I silently thanked God for bringing him into my life. A father is not defined by biology, but by his ability to teach a child how to live, how to love, and how to be loved. Our life wasn't always smooth. There were seasons of poor harvests, nights spent tending to sick children, and the occasional quarrel between siblings. But somehow, we always found a way through, together. Each morning, waking up to the sound of our children laughing, seeing Caleb's warm smile, I knew I had found heaven right here on earth. Now, with 22 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, I feel my life has come full circle. I've learned that after the storm, the sun always returns, and sometimes the worst things that happen to us open the door to the most beautiful blessings. Garrett Blackwood may have taken a part of me, but he could never take away my ability to love and be loved. Every day, I live with gratitude, grateful for the trials that made me stronger, for the beautiful family Caleb and I built, and for the chance to share my story with you. I hope that this story brings you faith in the power of love and forgiveness. If it touched you in any way, please share it and follow along for more stories. Life is full of surprises, and I'm still here, arms wide open, ready to embrace whatever wonderful thing comes next.